they had a big desire to do analytics at a higher level in HFM. And one of the reasons for that, HFM is at high level already, but one of the reasons they were looking to do it at a higher level is part of the specifics about their HFM application. They'd done a number of acquisitions over the years, and what they had run into is they'd just been pulling in the full account structures and entity structures and department structures of these acquisitions into their HFM application. So their HFM application was very large. They had just thousands upon thousands of accounts. I believe it was 22,000 accounts. They had thousands of entities, and their custom dimensions were used and reused. So that was part of the reason looking to do analysis at a higher level. Didn't need the individual account level detail. The other thing to keep in mind is that Windstream is a telecommunications company, so they have a lot of statistical accounts in their HFM application as well because of for regulatory reporting. So that's what they really wanted to get away from, doing that zero level kind of account analysis and move up to a higher level than that. And what they were doing also is, on the side of that, is the other issue with that is they were doing analysis of the upper level members in the HFM, and then they were switching to another tool to do queries, skipping kind of the bottom level of HFM down into their source data to get the actual transaction details that were popping out at them at higher levels. So those two things combined kind of created the need for a little bit of revamp of their HFM system, some additional reporting and analysis capabilities, as well as kind of drill through into that detail level of transactions. So the other thing that was happening was they were loading their data twice so that they could show, because of all these acquisitions and because it's a continuing thing with them, they were loading their actuals twice to show a pro forma scenario and an actual scenario. And then there's a lot of issues with that, and this made their management reporting needs were very difficult to handle in HFM because of a lot of these different types of things. The other thing is that they were doing their planning and analysis in something else, but then they were loading it into HFM, and they were trying to do it at one level, which was different from what HFM had, and that was causing some problems as well. So just a little bit about the application itself. As I mentioned, there were 20,000 plus accounts. I believe it was 22 or 23,000 specifically. 13,000 financial accounts and roughly 7,000 or 8,000 stat accounts. There were over 4,500 entities, and 3,500 of them were in different role structures. So you can see that there was a lot of different pieces and moving parts, and a lot of confusion around the roll-ups, as well as, when we talk about making management reporting difficult, you can imagine how segmented and things like that this structure made it. So and then the custom dimensions were very had been used and then reused, and so that kind of tore up kind of what the custom dimensions are. Some of the entities use them. There's a lot of different things going on. Basically, they could use some cleanup. So some of the objectives in the EAL project. One of the things, as I mentioned, they want to provide better capabilities. They decided they definitely wanted to have drill back to the detailed data. The other thing was they needed to streamline the HFM application. There's too many accounts. The rules were overly complex. They didn't really need as many as they had because they weren't doing a lot of things they weren't doing in the HFM application. The other thing is they really want to make their management reporting easier. This is an application that was used by not only this consolidations and accounting group, but it was also used by FP&A. So a lot of their management reporting was driven out of HFM and those numbers. And then kind of feeding into that is also they wanted to allow to be able to do planning at a higher level. So FP&A could utilize something at a higher level that wasn't at that regulatory level that was much lower at the HFM, that was in HFM at the time. So this is kind of what the initial solution came up with, that MindStream came up with. We wanted to do Hyperion financial reports out of Essbase for the FP&A team. We're going to have the application level. We're going to have HFM feed the actuals via EAL into Essbase, and then allow the planning team to do their analysis and their planning in Essbase. You have a data integration component with FDM, and then a drill-through piece down into JDE. When we started talking, the more we talked about, we thought maybe we'd put an Essbase cube in between JD Edwards and FDM, and we'll get to that in a minute. But that was kind of added later. Some of the design discussions in the design, so once we dove into deeper design and started going through this, that was kind of, this original solution was strong, the requirements piece. When we got into the actual design discussions and started laying this out at a very lower level, some of the discussions we had were, the Essbase was going to allow for faster aggregation of data, and FDM and ERPI drill back to the source system to display the transactions, but we had some issues with ERPI and the level of details that go and the flexibility it had at the time. So another thing that we talked about was the base level in HFM. They had over 10,000 accounts, 496 functional work groups. Even after we'd pared it down from 20,000, this is still what you're looking at. This is what we've found that they needed going forward. They're still going to have about 10,000 accounts, again, 496 functional work groups, 125 product values, and then still have over 3,200 entities. So we got down from 4,500, we got down from 20,000 accounts, but we still had a pretty sizable metadata set here. So, if you look at that, that's almost 2 trillion possible combinations, and that's just one scenario. So the other thing is they have 5 active scenarios. So that, you're talking about a potential for a lot of data there. And that worried all of us a little bit. So, but, we can go with that. So the other thing was drilling back into JDE, because of the way ERPI works with HFM and Essbase, you're going to have to be at the base level of entity, functional work group, and account, and get back down into the in the HFM structure to be able to drill back down into the detailed data. So one of the things we decided was that for people to really be able to use this, one of the things that Windstream was really hesitant about was the fact that it has to be at that base level of data. So being at that 0 level and all those 2 trillion possible combinations per scenario was going to be a problem for them. So one of the things we looked at was the consolidation of accounts and functional work groups to roll them up to a higher base level and then allow drill through from that upper level. So if we had an application that instead of being at 10,000 accounts was at a lower level, maybe we could drill back from that upper level, and that would be sufficient for them. So one of the things we did was to be able to do drill back at multiple levels. We used the MindStream FDM customization called Drill Into Anything to allow that to go from drill through FDM, but not necessarily through the FDM import piece. And I'll get to that in a minute because there's some fine lines here. Then one of the things we also decided to do was inside of JD Edwards, there's things called category codes, and those are kind of attributes of accounts or customers or business units, really, in JD Edwards, similar to a cost center, or it informs the entity roll-up structure. So we decided to leverage categories so you could drive SQL queries against that. So to do the FDM imports, what we did was we selected based on the category codes instead of based on the actual account numbers. And when that came in, that would allow the drill through. Basically what we did is, so we took 10 accounts and gave them one category code, and that category code became the 0 level for the account dimension, or something akin to that. It's a little more complicated than that, but essentially that's a good analogy. The other thing we decided was that there's multiple needs throughout the organization from different levels of data, but we decided it would create different applications and connect them at different levels. So we use Essbase as a data integration tool to do that. FDM pulled the data from Essbase to Essbase or to HFM, and we'll get into that, the drawing on that and the schematics in a minute. And then the other thing, we still needed to move HFM data, any journal entries, things like that that are done in HFM into the Essbase cubes, so that they would stay in sync and the actuals would be the actuals no matter where you looked. So we kind of came up with a unique EAL configuration to do that, and we used 2 Essbase databases, and I'll detail that in the future in future slides as well. So this is kind of the final solution and flow of the data. This is a lot bigger and better and more complex than our screen, and it actually works really well, and it's actually a lot simpler once you start to break it down. So you can see in here, the very bottom, you see the JD Edwards piece, the trial balance. Then we basically fed the data into a staging cube, which is an Essbase cube. And we'll zoom in on pieces of this as we go through the presentation. But basically rolls up through the staging cube, then FDM pulls it out of the staging cube into a reporting cube or into HFM. And then it's pushed up even further by FDM again into an analytics cube. And then we have feeds, and then we have pieces going into financial planning as well. And there's a statistics cube. So one of the things, that's another piece of the solution. One of the things we did was, let's move all the statistics out of HFM. I know they're regulatory and things like that, but let's move them out and put them in their own standalone Essbase cube. Make reporting on that unique, because within financial reports you can still bring in grids from other sources. And so we decided to leverage that functionality instead. So here's just a couple explanations around some of the design. There's a staging cube. That's just the data at its lowest level. That's brought in at the account, business unit, or cost center level, functional work group level, really the true zero level of what had been the zero level of HFM previously. The lowest level, account by account, functional work group by functional work group, and entity by entity, or the bottom level of entity. That brings all of that in, and the nice thing about that is the data can be rolled out of JD Edwards into Essbase and staged in Essbase. Any changes for roll-up structures and things like that, you can now manage inside of Essbase. The reporting cube, it's going to contain financial data that's used in all the reports. It contains the complete entity structure, but the number of accounts has been shrunk down to just over 1,000. So now it's just 1,000 accounts and just 150 functional work groups. And just to keep in mind, you were at 23,000 beforehand. Now you're down to 1,000. And the functional work groups has gone from 496 or 500, around 500, down to 150. So you've made a significant data aggregation at that point. The analysis cube is further up the chain, and that starts to consolidate the entity structure. One of the things that they look at a lot is, for a company that does a lot of acquisitions, is acquired or versus heritage or legacy. And then everything right now is rolling into heritage, but that was really set up so that in the future, as they model future acquisitions, they can handle that. And then the functional work groups are consolidated yet again, and they go down to 70. So this is getting, you're really winnowing down the data and doing analysis now at a much higher level. And then just some notes about why we do this and why we're able to get away with this. The cash expense book, this mirrors that. So that was something that they were able to get to and made organizational sense. And then finally, the stats cube, as I mentioned, it contains all the non-financial statistics data. So all your regulatory data that they have to share with the FD is now out of a stats database in Essbase. It doesn't have to clog up all the inner workings of HFM. And that literally, even after we kind of went through and consolidated some accounts and did some integration and stuff of mappings and things like that, still over 5,000 accounts. So there's a lot of unique pieces of data that they were required to give, and it just made a lot of sense to put that in another Essbase cube. And then there's a planning cube. And the nice thing about this was we were able to pull the FP&A users out of HFM. And part of that is, I'm sure people that have HFM as well as planning, or people that only have one of the two, will start to understand, FP&A does have a different calendar than accounting. And that's kind of nice to be able to separate them, because they need things at certain time frames and when they need them, and accounting needs things when they need them, and there is a difference in the timeline and the calendar there. So it's kind of nice to be able to separate them, so you have different things going on in different areas. The other thing we did is the product is no longer a dimension, but it's on each entity, because that's the way they really denoted it in JD Edwards. And because of that, you're able to shrink your data load size. So that helped with performance. So here's the first data extract that we're talking about. As I mentioned, like, you have the JD Edwards piece at the very bottom. That's the trial balance. Comes out, goes into the staging cube, and then if you see the details there, it pushes it up to the staging cube is then going to push it up to the financial planning and the reporting cube. But here's, you can see the account level, level 0. To really what is level 1. I mean, I guess you could kind of say it's level 2, but That's why I have the question marks there. But it goes up, and then functional work group has that first level of consolidation up to 150 from in this cube. So any time you change mappings, when you think about something like a DRM product or something that could help you do this is basically being done in Essbase Stream. Those roll-ups of those functional work groups or those accounts, if they ever change, they can be changed right here in the staging cube, and you don't have to repopulate the whole data pool from JD Edwards. And that was actually one of the things we really ran into with their systems people, and that was the load against JD Edwards. JD Edwards is still an S400 version of that, and the load of querying that multiple times was a big issue for them, and they really didn't want us hitting that all day, every day. So being able to stage that zero-level data, and if the only thing that's changing is a mapping or essentially a roll-up structure, you can change that in this lower-level staging Essbase cube without having to re-query the entire trial balance. Because when you think about how many accounts, entities, functional work groups, all of that stuff that really truly zero-level has, you're talking that trial balance is millions upon millions of records when they pull it out. So the next step in the data extraction is staging to the event piece. If you look at that staging cube's on the bottom here now, and you can see that FDM is actually pulling the data out of that staging cube and pushing it to the reporting cube as well as the HFM application. So it's pulling that out. Again, you're mapping it up. Functional work group now goes from level 1 to level 2. Now it has that account, basically FDM pulls at that top level of account and functional work group in the staging cube, which is already rolled up one level. And then inside these other applications, they roll up another level. So you can see that that's coming, and then the reporting cube is then going to push up to the analytics cube, and we'll talk about that. Then this is step 3, where it goes up into that reporting cube. DIA is going to facilitate drill throughs. If you're in the reporting cube and you want to do drill through, you'll drill back into FDM, and then from FDM you'll skip the staging cube using the category code SQL and go directly into JDE to get back your detailed transactions. So, and that's why this line goes out and around down into JD Edwards. That's the DIA customization. So as I mentioned, there's kind of a fine line between where the customizations are. So getting into step 4, you go from that reporting cube. Again, you're using FDM to pull out from that reporting cube at the upper level and reporting into what is now the 0 level of the analytics cube, functional work group level 2 and account level 1. And you've also rolled up your entities. Now there are only 3 entities in the analytics cube: consolidations, the consolidating entity, a heritage entity, and an acquisition entity. And that's it for the entire cube. And if you drill down from here, again, using the category codes, it will bypass that the 2 cubes prior to that, and those roll-ups, and use the category codes data we're getting right back into. You can get a pretty large set of transaction data pulling out of the analytics cube because you're multiple entities, you're pulling multiple accounts, and multiple zero-level functional work groups. So a little bit more about the reporting and analysis solution. You can use the financial planning cube, and then HFM feeds the reporting cube and the FP&A cube, the EAL. And everybody's using financial reporting in SmartView, and you can see kind of the cubes that feed into that. There's not really a lot of financial reporting, and this is a little inaccurate because SmartView, there is some SmartView against HFM, but there's not really a lot of financial reports against HFM. Most of that is against the reporting cube, the FP&A cube, the stats cube, and the analytics cube. Here's just kind of an example of the stage cube, just to show you kind of some of the things done. You'll see that if you wanted to find general travel expense, it'd be recorded on this business unit in JD Edwards. The HFM entity is right up there at the top of this. The custom one is over there, 020, and then the account shows here. Mapping done in the staging cube, so it's just that roll up to travel, and then you can see the functional work group rolls up to OSBC. And here's what it would look like kind of from a tree structure. And you can see the green would be in the stage cube where the true 0 level information is at that bottom kind of full string level. Just a little bit about the drill into anything solution. As I mentioned, this is kind of a customized solution. It allows you to drill from FDM into other sources beyond what ERPI allows. We came up with this a few years ago, and ERPI has gotten a lot more flexible since then. So, you know, you definitely don't have to use it as often, but it can help with things like this, where you're going against, you're kind of querying back against something that's different from what you did as the import, and that's a very powerful thing to do with FDM, and you can do that to really kind of customize your drill through, so it doesn't have to be exactly what came in through FDM beforehand. Here's an example of the drill through. So if a user starts in SmartView and they want to get the details of the traffic, you can see, you know, going back to that role structure I just showed you, 0 level here is now travel, whereas there's actually multiple travel accounts inside the GL. Drill down on that to the 0 level inside the reporting cube that you're using. You click the drill through button, take you into the FDM interface, and it'll show you what was mapped in there. You can then click on the mount from the source and drill through the source button, and that's what takes you into the drill into anything solution, and you get every transaction that happened that rolls up into that upable member solution intersection. So in this case, you get every travel account and everything and every detail. The other thing is the grid now allow drill back into JE, the grids inside HFM. And in the reporting cube, you can build the base count entity functional group. But remember, in the reporting cube, the functional work group's already at level 2. Or the bottom. From there, which is the structure, the heritage, consolidated, or acquired. It's only structure. But basically, those different aggregated Essbase cubes drill from the bottom with an so that when you go through, you're getting a lot more data. So what was EAL used for in this project? EAL was originally proposed to move all of the HFM data into Essbase so that they could do reporting against Essbase to stay in sync with that. And any adjustments you do in the HFM and things like that would move over. But since the different dimension leveling, and since there's a lot of roll-up structures along the way, we had to make some adjustments to how we were going to use EAL going forward. And this is why we had to make those adjustments. I don't know how many people have used EAL, but EAL, the target database, one of the problems we had with when you set EAL originally, it makes HFM own that Essbase database. So HFM builds the Essbase, the EAL piece, queries HFM, and then builds the Essbase database, and there's not a lot of interaction you can have with the EAL database. If you start making adjustments in EAL, you're going to run afoul of what, I mean, if you start making adjustments in Essbase to the EAL database, you're going to run afoul of EAL, and it's going to give you problems. So one of the and then the other thing is we really only wanted to move journals from HFM. Once we got into the really the meat of the design and started going through each step in the process flows and things like that, we really started realizing that all we really want to move from HFM is journal entries, because there were no when it was said there were going to be no rules in HFM. All of the rules from those complicated rules were really around FP&A, management reports, stuff like that. So we moved those out into space anyway. So what we really wanted to do is just take journal entries and move them over to via EAL into the Essbase. And if EAL overrode the entire Essbase actual data, you'd have your drill-through links would be lost. Again, that goes to the whole EAL ownership of the Essbase database, and that was going to be a real problem for us. So the other thing is EAL replicated partitions that take the whole value and move it over, and not the incremental journal value anyway. If we just move the journal entry value from HM into Essbase, if you have an account value of $1 million and you made a journal entry for $50,000, the new value is really $1,050,000. But if you wanted to move over $50,000, we'd be on the far side. EAL would put $50,000, and that would be the total value of the account. So that's a problem. We can't use a replicated partition, an EAL replicated partition, because it doesn't do either. It overwrites the whole value. So you can think about that as in Essbase language. If you're loading data, it overwrites existing, but it doesn't add to it, and that's essentially the problem. So EAL, also another problem with the replicated partitions is if you are HFM and you load it, like if you have a value and you zero out the value and there's now zero, it will have that zero over in Essbase. If you delete out everything and let's say you refeed HFM, and now that account is what should be equivalent to a pound missing or null value in HFM, it will not replicate the pound missing over. So if you do insert when you feed HFM, you might refeed. If there's been adjustments in the GL and now you have a blank part, like a blank data intersection that had value before, Essbase is still going to show that value from previously when you use EAL replicated partitions, which is a significant problem when you're trying to do this to get better accuracy. So what we came up with for the EAL solution is decided to use a transparent partition. So that takes care of that whole replicating of data. The transparent partition is kind of a live view into the HFM data. So it would take care of replicating the pound missing value, or not the pound missing, and zeroing out or deleting out a value. It would also theoretically not impact our zero level feed and wouldn't overwrite our links in HFM to destroy our drill through. I mean, in FDM to destroy our drill through. So what we did is set up an extra database. So all those things rolled together, we set up an extra database with a transparent partition into HFM. Here's essentially what it kind of looked like. You have your Windstream reporting application underneath Essbase application. Underneath that, you have your reporting Essbase database, the one we would use, and then we have the HFM ENT, which is really a database that holds no data. All it holds is a transparent partition into HFM data for the journal entries. And here is the HFM region inside of EAL that we extracted. So this is what we told EAL, this is what we want out of HFM. We want all the base members of year. We only want actual, all the base members of NT period. ICP, we only want ICP none, because that's where they were going to put all their journals. We want all of the members of value, we want base members of the custom dimensions 1, and then we want, for custom 2, 3, and 4, we had specific members that they were going to be journaling into, and we're going to just pull those. For view, we want periodic, and then we want all the base accounts. So that's what's coming out of HFM. EAL is only going to, basically, EAL is only going to launch accurate HFM, keep that updated in the transparent partition in that space. Then what we did, so here's what you see the HFM and then you have your source database. The one thing to keep in mind is you're not allowed to edit that partition. Anybody who's out there that wants to look at oh, I'll just create, tweak the partition, and you can't. If you do, you're with EAL. So and actually you can't really even open this partition in EAS because or the EAS console, it won't allow you to open it. It comes blank. So this EAL really needs to define this partition, and then it will feed it. And you do all the controls from that query definition that I showed you from HFM, and then there's also a translation target destination that we'll get to. I have that coming. But So use transformation to get rid of some of these issues that we talked about earlier and use that database. Then what we did was inside the reporting application or the reporting database, we created we linked the databases using an XREF. So we took the actual scenario, and you can see the picture of it here. We have basically what we did was have actual, we had an actual total or total actual. Below that we have actual, and then we have HFM journals. So the HFM journals come across dynamically with that XREF from that transparent partition, and then add to actuals to show the total actuals, which is the total value from HFM, which will always tie to HFM. If you want to see the unjournaled, or I guess unadulterated actual dimension, you can see that that will tie to the GL. So that actual member right there will tie to the GL. The HFM journals are the journal entries, only the journal entries done inside of HFM. They add together to give you something to tie to HFM. And then you can see that what we did there then also is add the pro forma adjustments to get you a total of pro forma. So that's what the scenario dimension looks like in their reporting cube. And that will bring in all of that EAL linked data. Again, kind of going back to the controlling of those targets, here is your EAL Target Translation. So within EAL, you're allowed to put in different pieces. You can see we use 2 mapping tables for period and year. Anybody that's worked with both HFM and planning or Essbase, I guess Essbase isn't as big a deal because you can create it as you want on the fly, and if it's a native Essbase app, you can name your members however you'd like. But what we did with the years is it still has the FY indicator like a planning application, and so we just do a mapping from HFM has 2011 is 2011 or 2013 is 2013, and then in the Essbase world it's FY13 or FY11. And so in that mapping table, these mapping tables you can use with EAL. They're pretty easy to use. You have to create the mapping table and then edit the mapping table, and you're going to need access to your EAS repository to do that. So if you are setting up EAL at your company and your Oracle or your relational database administrator won't allow you to have access to this, one of the things you can do is just have EAL create the table. It will do that in the EAS schema. Have them export that table, and there's documentation to show the table name, and then fill it out in Excel and have them just import those rows into the mapping table. I mean, mostly they don't change. It is a little strange that Hyperion or Oracle doesn't really give you any interface to interact with that mapping table, seeing as it probably, when you think about it, you'll add more eventually into the application, so you're going to need access to that mapping table. You might not need it every day, but you are going to need some access to it. And for year and period, you're not going to need a lot, but for other dimensions, if you have some, I can imagine people with HFM custom dimensions that have mapping tables to an Essbase database that they're going to need more constant access to those mapping tables. So it is a little interesting that you don't have it. And then you can also see the member selection there that is also part of our custom range. Okay, so just a little bit about lessons learned. One of the things we learned with this is if you're going to go with this type of configuration and kind of EAL in general, EPMA is not going to be your friend. I would argue that it's never your friend, but that's a discussion for another time. So be careful with EPMA, with straight Essbase in general. Even if you're just using straight Essbase and EPMA, we had a lot of issues with that. There's a lot of connection problems, a lot of restructures that just never finish. I mean, they're finished in Essbase, but apparently EPMA doesn't think so. So there's a lot of problems around EPMA with native Essbase. The other thing is EAL is very different. There's basically 2 main versions of EAL, the new versions in 11, kind of post 11.121 and pre 11.121, which is really 11.113. If you're using them, they're very different. Like as I mentioned just now, that mapping table in the 11.2.1 and forward version, that mapping table is basically what I just said. It's set up inside the EAS repository, and you're going to need some kind of help to get access to it. in 11.1.3 and prior to 11.1.2.1, you have the ability to do a bit of SQL mapping inside the EAL module inside EAS, which you do not have going forward. So they're still doing a lot of updates to EAL, it seems like, but it's something to keep in mind. So if you set it up, or if you're thinking about setting it up, you want to make sure that you work with the version. Make sure if you're thinking about doing an upgrade, you may want to do the upgrade first and then look at EAL versus looking at EAL now. So that's something to keep in mind. Obviously, the third point there that I have under EAL is obviously pretty obvious. It still needs work on the replicated partitions. The fact that it won't zero out or pound missing out a value is obviously a big problem for people. That the whole reason to set this up is to keep HFM in sync with Essbase for planning, and if it won't do that, you got a big issue. And then finally, the last one is, as I mentioned a couple times, EAL doesn't like to share the Essbase database. It really likes to own the whole thing. So I think going with that replicated partition and then using XREFs for the data getting in there is something you really need to think about. Also, the other thing is you're going to find is when you start to move data or populate data, you have to remember that HFM's aggregation is different than Essbase. When you put Essbase together, most of the time, like an entity structure is all straight addition aggregation in an Essbase or a planning application. In HFM, it doesn't work that way. I mean, because you have a lot of different things rolling into your parents, and you have to keep that in mind when you go to when you're moving that data back and forth, when you're moving that data from HFM to Essbase, because certain things, if you don't roll them up in a custom dimension somewhere, you won't see them. And we can get into that a little more, but it has to do with eliminations and all that kind of engine that HFM is built to do, and so it's not the same. So you need to be careful about where you're planning to put data and how you're going to move it over. Okay, with that, I guess I'll open it up for some questions. So I will. I have one question here. EAL similar to EIS, or is this completely different? And the answer to that is EAL completely different. It works differently. The only data source that EAL is going to get data from is HFM. So it's only a link from HFM into Essbase. EIS is really more for relational data sources or other data sources, getting them into Essbase. So EIS is Essbase Integration Server, which is really now, for the most part, replaced by Essbase Studio. And that is very different than Essbase Analytic Link. Essbase Analytic Link is only meant for kind of real-time updates from HFM to Essbase. So if I have any other questions, I think we're going to have to use the question box here. If people have other questions and then we'll type it in the box, I'd be happy to answer them. I don't see any right now. Is the question thing not working? I see some people raising their hands, and I don't know how. I'm not sure if I guess there's the question box. I know everybody knows the question box there because I got a lot of responses about being able to hear us and stuff like that. So if you have questions, please, by all means, feel free to type them in, and I'm happy to answer them. But I don't see any right now unless they're just not coming through. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, I'll probably end the webinar a little early. All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and please stay tuned for MindStream's next webinar, which I believe will be in November. I think it's a very exciting topic of streaming analytics. So if you're interested, please stay tuned. All right. Thanks very much.